Have you ever walked into a room where every eye already decided what you're worth? Ms. Anderson had 32 of them, to be exact, and not a single one blinked. It was her first morning at Oakvale Preparatory Institute, the kind of school with marble floors, legacy admissions, and students who flew private for long weekends. Her second-hand flats clicked softly as she stepped into the classroom. Room 3C, and the air shifted. Not with curiosity, but calculation. The first insult wasn't spoken. It was texted. Across the front row, Kendall Roth's manicured fingers danced across her rose gold phone. In less than 10 seconds, a group chat named Hand-Me-Down Teacher was born. One student laughed, then two, then the whole row. Is that linen or Target clearance? Kendall whispered, loudly enough for Ms. Anderson to hear. The comment rippled through the classroom like static. No one was subtle here. Subtle was for people who had to hide their meanness. Ms. Anderson didn't flinch. She walked to the front, set her worn satchel on the desk, and began writing on the whiteboard in clean, looping strokes. The Power of Voice, Unit 1, Literature and Identity. In the back, Greg Carpenter leaned back in his seat, arms crossed over his designer blazer, chewing gum like it was a performance. His phone was already recording. A dollar bill, crumpled and greasy, thrown across the room, hit the floor by Ms. Anderson's shoe. Hey, miss, you dropped your paycheck. Laughter exploded. She glanced at it. One beat, two, but didn't move. She turned back to the board and kept writing, her face unreadable. Silence crept in around the edges of the laughter. There was something off. A flicker of confusion passed between Greg and Kendall. Why didn't she react? Why didn't she snap, cry, scream, report them? Why didn't she break? They didn't know Ms. Anderson. Not really. They hadn't seen the scar beneath her collarbone, where a broken bottle met flesh at age 15. They didn't know about the trailer park 2 hours outside Santa Fe, where water came in jugs and light came from candles when the bill wasn't paid. They didn't know that summer break meant working graveyard shifts at the truck stop diner while her classmates went to Cancun. They didn't know she used to fight in underground rings, that she'd once choked out a 200-pound man with a broken wrist and a sprained ankle because she had no choice. That Coach Marquez, the retired Marine who ran the gym with punching bags duct taped to the ceiling, once told her, don't fight to win, fight to walk away standing. Before we continue, let me know where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button if you've ever had someone underestimate you just by merely looking at you. But back at Oakvale, all they saw was a woman in shoes that weren't designer, hair in a plain bun, blazer that wasn't this season's fashion. Let's begin, she said, voice steady. Page 4. Of Mice and Men, George and Lenny. Who can tell me what makes their relationship different from everyone else's in the book? Blank stares. Greg raised his hand, mock innocent. Because George doesn't leave Lenny for being poor and stupid, he offered. Unlike real life. Another wave of cruel laughter. Ms. Anderson nodded slowly. Close, she said, turning to face them. Because George chose loyalty over convenience. Something most of you wouldn't recognize in your own lives. A pause, then silence. Not long, but long enough. By lunch, the whispers had become a roar. Someone found her salary online, $39,000 a year. Greg snapped a picture of her car in the parking lot. A dented Toyota with missing hubcaps. He posted it on his story with the caption, "Our sub out here living like it's 2008. Even a faculty lounge wasn't safe." One of the junior teachers muttered, "Better not get attached. They eat subs alive here." Ms. Anderson sat alone at the edge of the teacher's patio, eating plain yogurt and apple slices with the same quiet calm she carried into every room. She wasn't surprised. She'd seen cruelty wear a uniform before. Day 2 was worse. The moment she entered, someone tossed a coffee cup at her desk. It burst, brown liquid seeping into the lesson plan she had handwritten at midnight. "Oops," said Adam Kent, quarterback, trust fund baby, and proud legacy. "Guess caffeine doesn't mix with chalk dust." She cleaned it up without a word. Kendall caught it on video, captioned it, "Coffee grounds and ground down dignity." It had 12,000 views before noon. She could have fought them. Any one of them. All of them, really. A hip toss here, a wrist lock there. She'd once flipped a grown man in a Waffle House parking lot for touching her waitress apron the wrong way. But restraint wasn't weakness. It was mastery, and that was something Oakvale had never seen. Day 3. Desks were rearranged. One stood empty in the middle of the room, her name taped to it in Sharpie. Miss Rockbottom. Ms. Anderson stood beside it, face unreadable, then calmly removed the label, folded it, and placed it in her satchel. Page 18, she said. Let's talk about loneliness. No one answered, but for the first time, someone listened. At 2:45 p.m., she found her tires slashed. All 4 security cameras were, conveniently, under maintenance. Greg walked past whistling, sunglasses on, backpack slung over one shoulder like he'd won something. She didn't even call AAA. She jacked up the car herself, hands black with grease by sundown. That night, she sat on her apartment floor, surrounded by notebooks. Her fingers hovered over her phone. She wanted to call someone. Coach Marquez, the dean who'd written her a letter of recommendation when no one else would. But she didn't. Instead, she whispered, "You are not here to fight. You are here to teach." Then she opened her laptop and revised her next lesson plan. She added a new title, Invisible Battles, Literature and the Power of Restraint. They had no idea who they were provoking, but they would. Because Ms. Anderson wasn't here to win. She was here to transform. Some scars you see, others live just beneath the skin, quiet and waiting. Ms. Anderson carried both. It was day 4 at Oakvale, and her desk was already sticky with syrupy soda, poured strategically over her lesson notes. Her hand hovered above it before she gently pushed the papers aside, reached in her bag, and pulled out a backup copy, laminated, unbothered. No reaction, no emotion, just control. Greg Carpenter frowned from his seat. The boy was used to power, to tantrums, to breaking people with a smirk. But Ms. Anderson, she didn't even blink. That unnerved him more than if she'd screamed. Years earlier, in a place 1,900 miles away, Leona Anderson had walked barefoot across hot gravel because her only shoes had finally split open. Her home wasn't really a home. It was a trailer bolted in a cracked New Mexico dirt. Rusted siding, a leaky roof. But it was what her father had managed to build with oil-stained hands and late-night labor. Marlon Anderson wasn't rich, but he was everything: mechanic, tutor, protector, cook, and parent. When he died, crushed beneath a lifted chassis when the jack failed, Leona was 15 and suddenly all alone. There was no lawsuit, no investigation, just silence. No one came knocking with condolences, only bills. So she got a job: busboy, grocery bagger, gas station clerk, anything that paid in cash under the table. She learned early how to spot the difference between a handout and a trap. And on one unremarkable evening, walking home from a late shift at Manny's Market, 3 men in a pickup followed her. What happened next stayed buried behind her ribs, wrapped in shadows. The police wrote a report and lost it. Her bruises faded. Her voice didn't. She stopped crying. She started training. Coach Julius Marquez didn't say much the first time he saw her. Just watched from the edge of the room as she pounded a heavy bag with no rhythm, no control, just rage. "Anger will make you sloppy," he finally muttered, arms crossed, voice like gravel and thunder. "You want to bleed, or you want to win?" She turned, wild-eyed. "I want to be able to walk home and not be scared." Then stopped swinging like a victim. From that day, she never missed a session. Krav Maga, judo, elbows, knees, groundwork, takedowns, control. She learned how to break a wrist in 3 moves, how to disable a threat without leaving bruises, how to make pain look like an accident, and more than anything, she learned patience. By 21, Leona was undefeated in the local underground fight circuit. Her record, 13-0. 2 more wins followed in sanctioned events. Opponents twice her size tapped out to the girl who never smiled, never celebrated, and always helped them up afterward. But she didn't want to fight anymore. Coach Marquez asked why. "Because winning isn't the same as healing," she said. So she walked away from the cage, enrolled in Central State University, and began again. Literature, was the only thing besides fighting that made her feel alive. The words of Baldwin, Ellison, Morrison, they didn't just speak to her. They understood her. She slept in her car the first semester, took tutoring gigs, sold her blood plasma twice a month, graduated with highest honors. Every tear she didn't shed in the ring, she poured into essays about injustice, visibility, and survival. Back in the present, Greg threw a crumpled page of her lesson plan across the room. Here, you forgot this. Guest teachers on food stamps need every sheet. Another eruption of laughter. Kendall caught the moment on camera, captioning it. New unit, dumpster diving for dignity. Ms. Anderson quietly picked up the page, smoothed it, and tucked it back into her folder. She opened her logbook, wrote the time, the name, the offense, closed it. Kendall blinked. Is she like collecting receipts or something? She's probably going to report us to the dollar store HR, Greg sneered. Ms. Anderson kept teaching. That day's lesson was on The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. She wrote the quote on the board slowly, deliberately. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Kendall looked up from her phone. Greg stopped mid-snap. Even Adam Kent tilted his head, a frown tugging at his lip. Why do you think the narrator calls invisibility both a curse and a power? Ms. Anderson asked. Silence. Then a voice, barely audible, from the corner. Because it lets him move unseen, but it also makes him feel like he doesn't exist. She turned. It was Donna Novak, the quiet girl. Overlooked, always in the back. Exactly, Ms. Anderson said softly. Sometimes invisibility isn't about being hidden. It's about being ignored. That night, she walked to her car and found a dead raccoon taped to the windshield. Blood soaked the glass. A note was scribbled in red marker. Go back to the desert. She stared at it for a full minute, then pulled a plastic bag from her trunk, carefully removed the animal, and tossed it into the nearby trash bin. No scream, no flinch, only silence. She cleaned the windshield with a water bottle in her backpack, changed her gloves, and drove away, hands steady, eyes forward. Back at her apartment, she opened her laptop and uploaded her daily incident report to a private encrypted folder titled Oakvale Archive, Ongoing Harassment. She had dates, screenshots, video captures, statements, and one more thing, a journal. Each night, she wrote her reflections by hand, observations not for the school board, not for a lawsuit, but for herself. Tonight's entry read, you can teach fire to contain itself, but it never forgets how to burn. I'm not here to fight children, but I'll show them what restraint looks like. She called Coach Marquez for the first time in months. He picked up on the second ring. You still breathing? He asked. No greeting necessary. Barely. Still teaching. Yes. Still not snapping anyone's spine. Not yet. Then you're winning. What Oakvale didn't realize was this. Ms. Anderson wasn't fragile. She was forged. Every insult, every prank, every cut was a test, and they were running out of ways to fail it. She knew that sooner or later, someone was going to break, and it wouldn't be her. They didn't think the quiet ones could shatter a room, until the quiet one finally moved. Friday at Oakvale Preparatory was supposed to be casual. Free dress, shortened classes, cafeteria cookies shaped like their school crest. But room 3C was anything but lighthearted. The air that morning tasted metallic, the kind of stillness that comes before a thunderclap. Ms. Anderson arrived early. Her whiteboard gleamed, already filled with quotes from James Baldwin and Maya Angelou that she had written the previous ahead. The lesson for the day, prejudice in modern American literature. But her desk had been moved. It now stood against the far wall, facing away from the students, like she wasn't supposed to speak or exist. The class erupted in a wave of giggles when she entered, but she didn't react. She calmly wheeled the desk back to its original position, turned, and faced them. Let's begin. They didn't know that her spine had been conditioned to withstand slams on concrete, that her breath was trained to stay steady during chokes, that her instincts were so refined she could hear a shift in posture behind her before a punch ever landed. But they were about to. The bait came 15 minutes in. If you're enjoying the story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It won't cost you anything, but it will mean the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video. Greg Carpenter, slouched in the back row, fake yawned as she read Baldwin aloud. Then he stood, without asking permission, and walked to the front. "I've got a better idea," he said, waving a folded sheet of paper. "How about a real essay on prejudice? Like how someone unqualified managed to get hired here." He tossed the paper at her. It landed on her desk, red letters across the top. "Affirmative action failure." Gasps. Someone whispered, "Yo," under their breath. Kindle covered her mouth and started recording. Ms. Anderson didn't move. She didn't touch the paper. She simply looked at Greg. "Mr. Carpenter," she said, voice even. "Sit down." He stepped closer instead. "Or what?" He was standing 3 feet from her now. "What are you going to do, Miss Southwest? Lecture me to death?" She didn't answer. He grabbed her wrist. That was his first mistake. To the students, it happened so fast they didn't even understand what they were seeing. Greg's hand had her wrist locked, but in one fluid motion, Ms. Anderson twisted inward, her body folding like silk, her shoulder dropping. And Greg, who'd never lost a thing in his life, suddenly couldn't hold on. His fingers opened involuntarily. His arm flinched backward. He stumbled, tripped, and fell. "What the?" he stammered in utter shock. No one laughed this time. They stared at Ms. Anderson like they were seeing her for the first time. "What has happened?" someone asked as another student said, "How did she do that?" Their shocked, stunned looks and confusion. Almost hilarious. Ms. Anderson straightened and calmly adjusted the sleeve of her blouse. "Physical contact with a teacher is classified as assault," she said. "I've documented the red marks on my wrist." The silence was so sharp it could have cut glass. Greg blinked, his mouth open to respond, but he had no script for this moment. In the second row, someone whispered, "Google her name." Kendall's thumbs tapped furiously, then paused. "Oh my God," she muttered. The whole row leaned in as her phone filled with search results. Underground fighter wins 15th match. Woman trains female officers in self-defense. Coach Marquez protege walks away undefeated. Former MMA fighter turns educator. Videos, articles, photos of Ms. Anderson standing inside a fighting cage, hand raised by a referee. Another with a line of female police officers in uniform posing after a training session, with her in the middle, looking as calm as ever. "Is this her?" Adam Kent asked, pointing at the screen. Kendall just nodded, phone trembling in her hand. Ms. Anderson stepped back from the desk, unzipped the side pocket of her satchel, and pulled out her phone. She turned the screen toward the class. A glowing red dot blinked from a voice memo app. "I've been recording since my first day here." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. Her words hit like a hammer dropped on marble. "And just in case your memories are as selective as your ethics." She pulled out a thick, black folder, its edges worn from weeks of handling. Inside, printed screenshots, social media posts, transcripts, time-stamped logs, photos of her vandalized car, and handwritten notes. Each tab labeled with dates and names. "This file has been updated daily," she continued. Greg backed up half a step. No swagger now, just confusion and panic. "I've documented everything," Ms. Anderson said, her voice cool steel. "Not for revenge, but for truth and correction, for those that would be interested in changing, in doing better, being better." She placed the folder back in her bag. "Now you understand," she said, eyes scanning the room, "why I chose to teach instead of fight." For a moment, it felt like the oxygen had been sucked out of the room. Phone slowly lowered. Some stopped recording. Adam swallowed hard. "You could have broken his arm, but I didn't," she replied. "That's the difference between strength and power. Strength knows how to hold back." Greg sat down without another word. For the first time, Ms. Anderson saw something new in his eyes. Fear and recognition. Kendall stood slowly. Her voice, when it came, was uncharacteristically small. "Why didn't you report us earlier?" "I did," Ms. Anderson said, "to every adult in this building, but they didn't listen. So I kept receipts. And you're not going to sue us. Not unless I have to. I came here to teach, and I still plan to." The bell rang, shrill and sharp, but no one moved. She looked out at the stunned class, some staring at their desks, others glancing at their phones like they didn't recognize themselves anymore. Then she picked up her marker and turned back to the board. I hope today gave you a better understanding of what prejudice really looks like. It's not always a slur or a punch. Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes it's silence. She capped the marker. Next week, we'll begin Toni Morrison. Beloved, bring your annotations. She walked out as if nothing had happened. But everything had changed. Sometimes the loudest wake-up calls begin as whispers. Then the world starts listening. The video hit the internet like a lit match dropped in a dry forest. Uploaded anonymously to a student-run account, it opened mid-confrontation. Greg Carpenter grabbing Ms. Anderson's wrist, then stumbling backward as she freed herself without raising her voice. The clip zoomed in on her calm expression, then panned to the stunned faces of students as phones lit up with search results. Headlines, fight records, photos. A quiet voiceover added weight to the visuals. She could have broken him. Instead, she taught him. Within 12 hours, the video hit 1.2 million views on TikTok. By the next morning, it was on the local news. By Monday, it was national. Talk shows called her the fighter who chose to teach. Editorials hailed her as the resilient educator we all need. Hashtags trended. Hashtag teach with strength. Hashtag not your enemy. Hashtag Miss Anderson deserved better. And with the spotlight came questions. Parents who once rolled their eyes at diversity hires began asking how their children had become so entitled, so cruel. Reporters requested interviews. Ms. Anderson declined everyone. I didn't come here to be a symbol, she told Principal Montana, whose office had suddenly been remodeled with PR statements and weak apologies. I came here to teach. But the board was already in motion. An internal investigation was launched. Anonymous staff testimonies flooded in. One teacher shared how they were told to overlook cheating if it came from the donor's kids. Another described being pushed out after disciplining a student whose parents sat on the fundraising committee. Mr. Cho, the calculus teacher, submitted recordings of verbal abuse and threats he'd endured for years, with no response from administration. Suddenly, Ms. Anderson's folder wasn't an outlier. It was Exhibit A in a much larger case. Greg Carpenter didn't return to school that week. Rumors swirled. Some said his parents were lawyering up. Others claimed he was suspended. But Friday evening, the school auditorium filled for a mandatory town hall. Parents packed the seats. Students sat on the edges, unsure whether to gawk or hide. Reporters hovered in the back, notepads ready. And then, unexpectedly, Greg walked in. Alone. His hands shook, his hair unstyled. No camera crew, no prepared statement. He stepped up to the microphone, his voice barely rising above a whisper. I always felt like the big guy here, he said. I control the room, so I wanted to make her quit. A pause, but she didn't. He glanced at Ms. Anderson, seated quietly near the sidewall, notebook in her lap. I didn't just insult her clothes or her background. I tried to strip her of her dignity, because I didn't understand my own. A hush fell over the crowd. She showed me restraint when I deserved humiliation. She could have snapped my arm, and instead she taught me something I've never learned in this school: humility. He looked back at the audience. Ms. Anderson, I am sorry. My behavior was cruel and totally unacceptable. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say all I've said. No one clapped. No one had to. The weight of the words was enough. Later that week, Kendall Roth deleted every one of her influencer accounts. Instagram gone. TikTok wiped. YouTube videos erased. Her last post read, I use my platform to mock a woman who came here to teach us how to be better. I don't want to be famous for tearing others down. I want to be useful. I'm so Ms. Anderson. Then she disappeared for a few days. Ms. Anderson found her sitting outside room 3C the following Tuesday. I shouldn't be here, Kendall said without looking up. But I wanted to return the markers I took and say I'm sorry. For all of it. Ms. Anderson took the markers gently, placed them on her desk, and nodded. Then we start from there. Adam Kent, still limping from classroom prank gone wrong, emailed Ms. Anderson a week later. Hey, I know you used to work at that shelter downtown. I signed up to help on Saturdays. If you ever want me to carry supplies or clean stuff, I'm available." She replied the next morning, "Service is the beginning of repair. I'll see you Saturday at 9 a.m. He showed up at 8:15. The school board passed new policy reforms within a month. Clear accountability channels for staff. Mental health counseling expanded. Bias training required. A reporting system established that bypassed administration directly to the board. Principal Montana announced his early retirement. His email said new opportunities. Everyone else called it a necessary departure. Ms. Anderson didn't gloat. Instead, she launched something new. The Revive Project, an after-school character development and conflict resolution program, open to all grades, no prerequisites. She told the students on the first day, "We're not here to fix you. We're here to teach you how to fix yourselves." The room held 30 chairs. 70 students showed up. Every Tuesday and Thursday, she stayed late, teaching everything from communication skills to basic self-defense to emotional regulation. They didn't call her Miss anymore. They called her Coach A. Even the boys who once mocked her now listened, took notes, and practiced breathing exercises like their lives depended on it. Because some of them realized they just might. During one Thursday session, a freshman raised her hand. "Why did you stay when everyone was against you?" Ms. Anderson leaned against the table, arms crossed. "Because I saw who you could be." A pause. "And because I don't back down from people who are still learning. I just refuse to let them stay where they are." She walked home that evening with the desert wind from her childhood echoing in her ears. She could almost hear her father's voice. "You're not built to break, Leona. You're built to bend and rebuild." Her phone buzzed. A message from Coach Marquez. "Heard about Revive. Knew you'd find a way to fight without fists." She smiled. "This fight's just beginning, but I think I'm winning." 1 year can change everything when the right person refuses to break. The morning sun slanted through the tall windows of Oakvale Preparatory, catching motes of dust in gold-lit air. The halls, once echo chambers of mockery and privilege, now pulsed with something different. Respect. Laughter bubbled, yes, but it was no longer cruel. Students from every corner of the socioeconomic spectrum shared lunch tables. The walls bore new murals, painted by the art club, with quotes from Baldwin, Angelou, Morrison, and one from Coach herself. "Strength isn't how loud you speak, it's how deeply you listen." No one called her Miss Anderson anymore. She was Coach A. Every Thursday, the Revive Project still met after school. It had outgrown its classroom and now filled the gym. Students circled mats, practicing de-escalation techniques, breath control, and role-playing scenarios that required something far harder than force: restraint. Seniors mentored freshmen. Boys once addicted to dominance learned accountability. Girls who once doubted themselves walked taller, swung freer, spoke bolder. On this particular Thursday, coaches stood at the edge of the circle, arms folded, observing with quiet pride. Then a familiar voice piped up. "Coach A," said Adam Kent, now one of the peer leaders, "you should show them the elbow break." Laughter scattered across the room. Coach shook her head. "That technique's for emergencies. Right now, we're learning how not to escalate." Kendall Roth added, smiling, "Like that time you disarmed Greg Carpenter with a wrist flick and a stare." Even coaches smiled at that, but there was no gloating, no lingering resentment, just shared memory, and what had grown from it. Another year passed, and after dismissal, she returned to her office, now larger, with department head on the frosted glass. She dropped her bag on the chair, rolled up her sleeves, and reached for the stack of mail on her desk. Scholarship thank yous, program invitations, a letter in thick parchment from the state's Department of Education. Then one envelope stopped her. The handwriting was familiar, neat, firm. Greg Carpenter. She opened it slowly. Inside, a short letter, folded once. No return address, just a date and a salutation. "Dear Ms. Anderson, I hope you don't mind that I still call you that. Coach felt too affectionate for someone I once treated with such cruelty. But I've learned, thanks to you, that names matter. And the name I gave you before wasn't worthy of the person you are. She inhaled sharply, kept reading. I'm in my first year of university, studying education and law, because I realize the systems I once benefited from blindly, they need people who understand both structure and empathy. You taught me that. Every time I'm tempted to raise my voice or flex ego, I remember the moment you let go of my wrist. How easily you could have broken it. How instead, you held your ground and broke my arrogance instead. You didn't fight us. You taught us. And that's a strength I want to pass on. Thank you for saving me from becoming what I was on track to be. Yours in gratitude, Greg. She sat in silence for a moment, the kind that vibrates with meaning. Then, gently, she folded the letter and slipped it into a drawer beside others. Notes from former students who now ran nonprofits, volunteered at shelters, joined the military, or signed up for education degrees. Each one a ripple from a single stand. By the final period, room 3C was buzzing. It was the first day of the new semester. Juniors filled the seats early, whispering to one another with excitement. Everyone wanted to be in Coach A's class. Her syllabus was famous for one reason. It never just taught literature. It challenged identity. She walked in precisely at 2:05, carrying nothing but a slim notebook and her usual quiet confidence. Every eye snapped forward. Some students instinctively straightened their posture. Coach surveyed them. Young faces, unwritten chapters, and smiled. "Welcome to American literature," she said. A pause. "But let's get one thing clear." She stepped forward, the room silent. "This isn't just a class about novels, or essays, or authors long gone." She placed her hand on the lectern. "This is training." A beat passed. Training for the kind of strength that builds instead of breaks. For knowing when to stand and when to listen. For how to stay whole when the world expects you to shatter. The air held stillness. Reverence. Coach smiled again, soft but unshakable. "And I'm honored to be your guide." Outside room 3C, the plaque now read, Leona Anderson, M.Ed., head of English, founder, the Revive Project. Next to it, a quote etched in bronze, "True warriors don't destroy, they build." And behind the door, students didn't just learn literature, they learned how to live. Have you subscribed to our channel yet? Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos.